Okay, hi everyone. We're making cinnamon rolls today. These are super easy and really delicious. And so here we go for our yeast dough cinnamon rolls. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a mixer this time with our cinnamon rolls. We have practiced before using yeast dough kneading by hand, but now we're going to switch to the mixer. We're going to start with the paddle blade, but then we are going to switch to the dough hook. Sometimes they look like this. Sometimes they look like a little curved S. Instead, depends on the type of stand mixer you have. But we're going to be kneading it by machine. And because we're doing it by machine, we actually have to have really hot tap water this time. Our hot tap water is going to wake up that yeast, and it has to be in between 120 and 130 degrees. The reason why it has to be so hot is because we are actually going to take 1 cup of flour, a half a teaspoon of salt, and a 1/4 cup of sugar, and we're going to then add our yeast. Because we're putting our yeast with all of those ingredients, the water has to kind of wake through all of those ingredients to get to that yeast. Okay, now remember, the yeast likes to eat sugar, so when it's fermenting and it's starting to bubble and foam up, it's going to be eating or breaking down that sugar. Okay, so the yeast wakes up with that hot water, eats that sugar, and then the whole point of the salt in the recipe is to control how much that yeast is actually eating that sugar. Okay, so salt is kind of like, I always say, the parent. It's the guardian of the sugar and how much candy that yeast is really eating. I have a 1/4 cup of butter, 4 tablespoons. It's already softened. I'm gonna give this a quick mix in my mixer. Have extra flour. The recipe calls for approximately 3 cups of flour. That kind of means that we're going to use as much flour as we need to, up to 3 cups. So it kind of depends on the temperature of your kitchen that you're working in. It kind of depends on how long you let your yeast ferment. It all depends on how sticky and when that dough actually forms. So I already have 1 cup in there right now. I have another cup here. I'm going to toss that in. I'm also going to add 1 egg into this recipe. I'm going to give this another stir. The next step is that you're going to continue adding flour until your dough has formed and it's actually pulling away from the edges of the bowl. You could do this by hand. I like to personally use the machine, so I'm going to turn it on with my pedal attachment still. And what I'm looking for is to do about a 1/4 cup of flour each time. I'm going to slowly add it. And I'm looking for that dough to leave the sides of the bowl and start forming a dough ball on the actual paddle. Dough hook on my KitchenAid mixer, my stand mixer, and I'm going to use it at medium speed and continue to knead. The machine's doing all the kneading for me. Remember, that's developing the gluten, so it's going to get a tougher dough. It should be more smooth. It shouldn't be as sticky or anything like that because it's going to be working that dough for a full 5 minutes. So it's been 5 minutes of kneading with the machine and the dough hook. It looks great. Sometimes the dough gets a little sticky and starts to stick to the sides of the bowl. It is okay because I still have the leftover of my 3 cups of flour from the beginning. So I'm going to be using this when I turn it out onto the counter, and if it starts sticking to my hands, I have this ready to go. So I'm going to lightly dust my countertop with the remaining flour that I had, because then it's okay. You're only adding up to those 3 cups of flour that original recipe said to. Now, remember, you want to let your dough rest, and that's called a bench rest. And so in the recipe, this says to rest for 10 minutes. Depending on your timing and how long you have, up to 10 minutes is great. If you have to do a little less, that's okay. It's still gonna be fine. But the whole point of resting is so that it kind of starts to double in size. It's making that carbon dioxide and it's gonna get nice and fluffy. So then the more time you have it to rest, the better tasting it's gonna be. Okay, so my dough has been resting for 10 minutes now, a nice bench rest. It's kind of fluffy, it's great, it's nice and soft. It's gonna be great for cinnamon rolls. So lightly floured surface. I still have my extra flour left. It's about a couple tablespoons. I have a lightly greased pan. This can be a square pan, a round pan, disposable pan, whatever you want. You're making about 8 to 10 rolls. You could also do multiple pans if you're gonna split them between like you and a partner. And then I have our filling. So I have cinnamon and sugar mixed up together, and I have 2 tablespoons of butter already melted, and I have a pastry brush ready to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out this dough to be about the size of a piece of paper. It says, the recipe says to be a 9 by 14. It's, you know, this is like an 8.5 by 11, so a slightly bigger than a piece of paper is how I like to imagine it. When you're rolling it out, remember you're trying to stay as thick as possible, so don't go smashing it down to the counter or anything like that. I like to always start in the middle and roll towards me, go back to the middle and roll away from me, and you're trying to aim for a rectangle shape, about the size of a piece of paper. All right, let's check this out. My piece of paper, a little bit bigger, a little bit longer. I think that's gonna be perfect. What I'm gonna do now is I'm going to use my 2 tablespoons of butter and my pastry brush. And I'm going to brush this butter on top of this dough. This is gonna help the filling stick to this inside. I would recommend using all 2 tablespoons, even if it looks like it's too much, because the more filling, the more deliciousness you're gonna have on those cinnamon rolls. Together, it makes a great cinnamon sugar mixture, and that's what we're aiming for. I'm gonna go all the way to the edge. It's okay if it gets on the counter a little bit. And then I'm just going to kind of lightly brush that cinnamon sugar, making sure that it gets in every little part of that dough. And then we're gonna go with a roll. It's very hard to see on the camera, but I have black thread. I'm only gonna need probably about a foot, maybe 1.5 feet of thread. Give that a cup. Now this is a great way. And like I said, you can totally use floss too. So when you're cutting your even cinnamon rolls, cut from the middle first. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna wind your thread around your hands, around your fingers. You're going to get your thread underneath your cinnamon roll, okay? And then you're going for the middle part. And when you hold it up, the threads, crisscross them, so you kind of make an X, and just kind of tightly squeeze them all the way to the bottom. I goofed and made 7 instead of 8. All right. From there, I'm gonna take my lightly greased pan, and I'm going to place my cinnamon rolls in the pan so that the roll part, the actual cinnamon roll, the swirl, you can see. Evenly space them apart as much as possible. Sometimes if you have 8, 9, or 10 of them in there, you might have to have them touching a little bit. As they continue to proof and rise, they are going to get a little bit bigger. And then when you're baking them too, they're gonna actually get bigger and end up touching. So I have 7 cinnamon rolls ready to go. Look at that deliciousness. I'm gonna let it rise for about 2 hours, if not even overnight. This is great to make for breakfast the next day. Then I'm gonna continue to bake it pull it out of the refrigerator for about a half hour to an hour. Let it get to room temperature first. Give it its final proofing. Then I'm going to put it in the oven, and I'm going to be baking it for, let me see. I'm going to be baking it for about 25 to 30 minutes at 375 degrees. I also have a great icing recipe so that when they come out of the oven, you can top it off with some icing, and then you can serve it up. So good.